They're called golden passports, documents obtained in Cyprus by rich people from a number of countries. The aim for some is to access the EU or avoid corruption, crackdowns at home or elsewhere. But is that legal? And what can the EU do to stop it? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the program. I'm Hashem Ahelbarra. An Al Jazeera investigation has revealed that Cyprus has been giving European passports to convicted criminals and high-level political figures in return for investing $2.5 million in the country. The large leak of passport data to our investigative unit exposes serious flaws to the island's so-called golden passport scheme. That's generated more than $8 billion for its government. The European Justice Commissioner says he'll consider legal action against Cyprus. Deborah Davis reports.
The European Parliament has repeatedly demanded an end to schemes where one country can sell passports which open up access to the rest of the European Union. In an exclusive interview with Al Jazeera, the European Justice Commissioner said the time had come for legal action.
I've had many contacts with the Minister of Interior in Cyprus. I said a letter to the government, and now we are analyzing if it's needed to introduce an infringement proceeding or to come with a legislative proposal.
The Cyprus Papers leak reveals the scale of passports sold to wealthy foreigners, including criminals and officials considered high risk of being corrupt.
The European Commission should put Cyprus before the European Court of Justice. The passport scheme of Cyprus is a risk to security in Europe. You should earn your passport and your citizenship by integrating in a society and not because you have a lot of money.
At a press conference yesterday, this is how the Cypriot Interior Minister branded the Cyprus Papers.
What Al Jazeera is doing is not investigative journalism, but rather propaganda against Cyprus.
But the scheme has always been controversial, even among Cypriot politicians.
The way the scheme was implemented the last few years, it was obviously a procedure that allowed cases for which the Republic of Cyprus should be ashamed.
From the point of view of the critics, the only thing that will satisfy them is the phasing out of the scheme. Is that also your view?
It's the best way, of course.
He also wants the Cypriot Parliament to take its own measures. A new law to strip passports from criminals has just been passed.
I want to be sure that it's possible to revoke the nationality when we have proof, we have evidence of a real problem of money laundering, corruption, or other kind of criminality. I have seen your report, so you will have the reaction of the government of Cyprus, but it's also the task of the justice system in Cyprus to investigate.
So far, the government says they've identified about 30 individuals who'd no longer be considered fit for citizenship. The evidence of the Cyprus Papers suggests there are many more. Deborah Davis, Al Jazeera, London.
Let's bring in our guests. From Brussels, Laure, Brillaud, Senior Policy Officer at Transparency International covering the European Union. From Nicosia, Cyprus is Praxoula Antoniadou Kyriakou, President of the United Democrats political party and former Minister of Commerce, Industry and Tourism of Cyprus. From Florence is Jelena Dzankic, co-director of the Global Citizenship Observatory at the European University Institute. Thank you all for joining us. Laure, I would like to ask you about the reaction of the government in Cyprus, which basically said that there were isolated cases that were blown out of proportion in the Al Jazeera investigative program. What do you make of that reaction?
Well, it's not the first time that Cyprus is actually that cases are exposed showing that there's been abuses of this program. So we documented that in the past. Actually, Cyprus itself reviewed some cases and identified about 26 individuals that were cases that were problematic, and now the Cyprus papers. So what we see here is not just a few bad apples; it's much more systemic. The rules, even if they've been reforms, are not adequate, and plus they don't seem to be well implemented. So I don't think we've been exaggerating, and I don't think Al Jazeera has been exaggerating when saying there is a systemic problem, and this program is really prone to abuse and vulnerable to money laundering and corruption risks.
Praxoula, the government in 2019 said or admitted to mistakes made during the processing of some of the requests and decided to strip passports from 26 investors. So in a way or another, we're talking about a problem that has been going on for quite some time.
Thank you for having me, Hashem. Of course, I have to clarify, I'm not a representative of the Cyprus government. I'm leader of a political party, and these are the views of our political party, though I am a former minister, of course. I would like to share with you a very relevant experience. I happened also to be a former economist with the Central Bank of Cyprus. I served there from 1981 to 2005. And during my service, I was also the coordinator of the work that was taking place with reference to the accession negotiations of Cyprus to the European Union between 1997 and 2003. And one main theme, of course, is the harmonization of local laws with the laws of the European Union and the implementation of these laws. And the main theme in this harmonization effort was to introduce legislation that had to do with anti-money laundering aspects, fighting money laundering, and introducing institutions that would prevent and fight money laundering. Actually, there is a very well-known unit at the Attorney General's office, MOGAS, which enjoys great respect both among European Union institutions and wider internationally. I think it's headed by a woman. The reason I'm saying this is that to the extent it goes without saying that if there are money laundering attempts or attempts for criminal action wherever in the world, and especially within the European Union, this should definitely be dealt with on the basis of European Union directives and regulations. Now, and I have witnessed the implementation of EU legislation in Cyprus.
We will go back and talk more into details about what the government has been doing, but at the same time about the concerns voiced by the European Union. But let me, for the time being, go to Jelena. Jelena, the European Justice Commissioner says that he's considering legal action to stop Cyprus from selling golden passports. What does that mean? Are we going to see more of a showdown between the EU and Cyprus?
Oh, well, that depends. We'll see how the situation is going to unfold in the coming weeks. But also the January 2019 report of the European Commission on investor citizenship schemes mentions the possibility of infringement procedures, especially in view of the anti-money laundering directives, whereby since 2020, since the 10th of January 2020, since the 5th anti-money laundering directive entered into force, countries are obliged to perform enhanced due diligence, especially as regards investor residence and citizenship programs. But as Laure said, essentially for the last 2 years, a number of European institutions, including the Commission, the European Parliament, have essentially highlighted the numerous problems with investor citizenship and residence programs in Europe. So I guess what we will see are significant developments in this regards and negotiations between the countries and the European Commission and other institutions.
Laure, I assume that the EU will definitely have to look into this issue in particular. But what do you think the EU will do? What kind of leverage it has to try to implement some sort of a clampdown on golden passports?
So what this story and other stories we've actually documented in the past show is that it's an EU problem that requires an EU solution. What these countries are doing is they're not only exposing themselves to risk or their citizens, but they're exposing the EU as a whole, because these people granted passport, they get free access to the EU, they can travel around, they can open a bank account in another EU country. So we've been really calling, it's been a long time, we've been calling the EU on doing something, and they, as was mentioned before, they came out with a report saying that they would do something, but we're still waiting for a response. And now the Commissioner Reinders said this week that they would be exploring whether the EU could bring infringement proceedings against Cyprus, whether there was a legislative path. And we really urge, the EC must, the Commission, must not waste no time on this. They must analyze whether the principle of sincere cooperation between member states has been violated, whether the security of the EU has been undermined by these schemes, and not only in the case of Cyprus, but in the case of other countries which also have this kind of schemes in place. And then so what we're doing is, what we're calling for is a phase out of these schemes, both passports and visa schemes. But in the meantime, we should not leave a vacuum, and the Commission must come up with a roadmap and with a legislative proposal to actually harmonize standards at EU level to ensure that there is no race to the bottom between member states that are trying to just present the scheme as more attractive.
Praxoula, anything you want to add to the ongoing conversation?
Yes. Just to clarify that the issue of citizenship still remains within the competence of a member state in the European Union. It's not regulated on an EU-wide basis yet, though, of course, if the EU proceeds to introduce EU-wide criteria, that might be to the benefit of all, because many other countries run citizenship schemes. What I would like to comment, however, is that to the extent that a few instances might have been traced, and I do not know specifics, I am not in the relevant ministry, but to the extent that some cases are being traced, I think to generalize and attack the whole program of a specific country as if everybody that invests in Cyprus is a criminal and whoever invests elsewhere is not. And what I would like to add here is that foreign direct investment is the preferable instrument of attracting foreign capital for development in all the countries, and it is directly encouraged both by the European Union and all countries actually as a type of lasting investment which can help development.
All right.
And in the case of Cyprus, most of the money that comes in is in the form of foreign direct investment, actually in the real estate sector. Now, if some of this money has been traced or will be traced that is not completely clean, yes, we should be very careful, and we should be trying to prevent money laundering attempts, and to the extent that such attempts have taken place, to run after them through our justice system. But you cannot penalize a country.
It's true. I mean, I see your point. Praxoula.
And the last comment, just the last comment. When I was in Qatar for the last 4 years, because I was working as a businesswoman there, half of the people I met had Canadian passports, and the other half had Schengen visa. Now, it was impossible that Cyprus gave them the Schengen visa because Cyprus is still not in Schengen. So we have to be careful And I don't
Praxoula, I see your point, and this is why I'm going now to Jelena. Jelena, you've heard what Praxoula basically was saying, that you cannot just single out Cyprus. Other countries are doing the same thing, and that is quite legitimate for any country to sell citizenship, because that would generate cash, and that cash could be injected into social development program.
Yeah, well, yes, and I would tend to say I agree. It's the access to member state citizenship is the prerogative of the member states. However, we always have to consider that accessing citizenship of any member state of the European Union gives the applicant EU-wide rights. Where I significantly disagree with the previous speaker are the actual practical concerns regarding investor citizenship programs. Here, Cyprus is not being singled out. There have been problems with the Cypriot program since 2010, 2011, where Rami Makhlouf had been given Cypriot citizenship in 2018, 2019. There have been issues related to corruption and scandals in Cyprus. Now, to go beyond Cyprus, we have seen corruption scandals in most of the countries in the European Union that have been implementing investor citizenship programs, including, but not only, Malta, Bulgaria, Portugal, Austria, etc., etc. Also going beyond Europe, you can see corruption and money laundering in countries such as St. Kitts and Nevis, the Commonwealth of Dominica, which was facing protests in February 2019 as a result of its investor citizenship scheme, but also the Comoros, which performed the mass sale of passports to the United Arab Emirates and Kuwait. So I don't think that in these cases, corruption is an exception. Okay. It is a rule to these programs.
Laure, others would tell you, for example, that you like it or not, but selling passports or citizenships has become a big global market for wealthy individuals who are looking for low taxes, elite education, or have their own political reasons. And when you say we have to reconsider or look into it, you seem to be in a way or another completely disconnected from the new reality in the world, which is basically the right of every single individual who has cash to buy a citizenship.
Yes, that's true. There may be legitimate reason to hold a second passport and legitimate reason for applying for a passport in Cyprus or elsewhere in other EU countries. But so Transparency International, as an anti-corruption movement, we're not positioning ourselves for or against these schemes. But what we've seen so far is that member states, countries in general, haven't been able to demonstrate that they could actually run this scheme safely. Even the Commission, in the report Jelena mentioned earlier, acknowledged that these schemes are inherently risky. And inherently means that by design, they were set up actually to attract investors at any cost. And any cost, it can be, we're not checking where the money comes from. We're not checking your criminal record. So that's what we've been pointing out.
Okay.
And so we're coming to the conclusion that they should be phased out because they are just too risky. It's not just because for ethical reasons or anything else.
Perfect. I see your point. Praxoula, very briefly, if you don't mind. I've been listening to you. You've been defending the track record of your country. And at the same time, I would like to remind you that the EU remains unconvinced that Cyprus is doing enough to stop suspect money and characters flowing into your country and, by extension, the EU.
As a liberal Democrat, dear Hashem,
I
am very much...
Go ahead.
As a liberal Democrat, because I'm the head of a political party that belongs in the European Liberal Democrat family, I couldn't be more in favor of fighting corruption and supporting democracy, and hence any measures that can be taken on an EU-wide level to strengthen the fight of the whole of the European Union against the money laundering, against corruption, could not but be welcome by the Liberal Democrats. However, we should not be singling out, and EU-wide policies could certainly solve many problems in the European Union. I have one small comment, another small history. You know, I happened to be in Qatar during the blockade in 2017. And I was leading a company there. And we felt very much offended. We identified with the Qatari people. And we felt very much offended that a small country like Qatar, small in terms of geography, of course, was being targeted by a group of countries which wanted to impose perhaps their own foreign policy or their own domestic policy on the policies of a small country. And you can find photos of me in the internet signing on these large posters of the emir in buildings, signing support for the emir and wearing the badge, because we felt what it is like to be targeting a small country to impose policies. So we should be careful. Certainly, we should be wary of attempts for money laundering and corruption. We should be improving laws wherever and whenever they need improving, but we should not be killing sources of development, especially if this development could help the whole of the European
I see your point.
Union, not just a small country.
I see your point. Perfect.
Certainly within regulation and common laws, if possible.
Okay. Jelena, you've heard what Praxoula has been saying, basically, which is a legitimate right for any country to look for sources of revenue to help in social development program. And she's been repeatedly saying that she's adamant about the need to implement anti-corruption, anti-money laundering protocols. But, you know, Jelena, everyone does the same thing. The UK does it. You pay cash and you get citizenship. The Americans do it. The Portuguese do it. The Spanish do it. Everyone does it. So why suddenly Cyprus?
Well, I think that, the sale of passports and also residence programs are problematic not only as regards the issues that we've been mentioning, including corruption, but they also, in a way, exacerbate a lot of inequalities. And this is something that Laure touched upon before, because also we have to consider where the buyers come from, where these funds come from, et cetera, and contextualize these issues in broader developments that are related to citizenship acquisition. So if rules are becoming increasingly stringent for ordinary applicants who live and work in the country, what makes it legitimate for a state to sell citizenship? And I don't think the fact that an increasing number of countries, and if you look at the global level, the sale of passports is essentially limited to a handful of islands. In the European Union, it's Bulgaria, and Malta and Cyprus, in addition to the case of Bulgaria. But outside of Europe, most countries offer different types of residence programs, whereas the sale of passports happens normally in these small islands. Now, I can accept that in such instances, it may generate some, let's say, quick cash injections. But the question is this also purely, regardless of the fact that it's highly ethically problematic to sell passports, that it increases inequalities, economically valuable in the long term?
I really appreciate your time. Unfortunately, we have to leave it there. But I promise you that we will revisit this particular subject in the near future, hopefully with you, particularly as the debate about whether citizenship should be considered in a commodity or not, and what kind of protocols should be put into place to ensure that there's no money laundering or any other issues involved there. Laure, Brillaud, Praxoula Antoniadou, Kyriakou, and Jelena, Dzankic, I really appreciate your insight. Thank you. And thank you too for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. For further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Hashem Ahelbarra, and the whole team here in Doha. Bye for now.